Mom, just checking in. Is everything still in good order for us? I held the phone to my ear. The plastic was cool against my skin. Outside, a blue jay was yelling at a squirrel from the big oak tree. My son Mark's voice sounded far away, coming all the way from Germany. Everything is fine, dear, I said. The roofers finished last week. Good, good. We want to make sure the place is kept up. It's a big investment. He didn't ask about my arthritis. He didn't ask about my neighbour Martha's surgery. He asked about his investment. I looked at the worn spot on the arm of my husband's old chair. I could still smell his pipe tobacco there if I tried. Well, I have to run, Mum. Big meeting. Talk soon. The line went dead. I placed the receiver back in its cradle. The click was very loud in the quiet house. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My house was in perfect order, but I was not. I spent that afternoon weeding the rose garden. My husband, Robert, had planted the first bush for me on our 10th anniversary. Now there were 30 of them. My knuckles ached as I pulled at the stubborn dandelions. The soil was rich and dark, cool to the touch. I remembered teaching Mark to ride his bike on the long driveway. He fell and scraped his knee right by the old stone wall. I carried him inside, his small body shaking with sobs. I cleaned the cut and gave him a cookie. He sat on the kitchen counter, swinging his legs, munching on the warm oatmeal raisin. Later, I polished the silver. It was my mother's set. I could see my reflection in the back of a spoon, small and distorted. I remembered setting the big dining room table for Thanksgiving, year after year. Jessica would always try to sneak an olive from the relish tray, her little fingerprints on the polished wood. The house was full of these small ghosts, ghosts of a family I thought I still had. The next week, my daughter Jessica called from London. The connection crackled. I could hear traffic in the background, the sound of a city that never slept. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice rushed. "Sorry I haven't called, it's been mad over here." "It's all right, sweetheart. It's lovely to hear your voice. Listen, I just have a minute. I was talking to Mark. He said the roof is done?" I felt a cold stillness spread through my chest. "Yes, it's all taken care of." "Great. Just wanted to make sure everything is still in good order. You know, for the future." There it was again. That phrase. In good order. Not for me. For them. I looked at the needlepoint sampler on the wall. Home is where the heart is. My heart felt like a small cold stone in my chest. "I'm managing just fine, Jessica." "Okay, great. Gotta go, my taxi is here. Love you." She hung up. I stood by the window, watching a fat robin pull a worm from the lawn. He flew away with his prize. I wondered if his children ever called just to check on the nest. That evening, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. I went downstairs and turned on the television, keeping the volume low. The blue light flickered across the living room, making shadows dance on the walls. An old movie was on, but I wasn't watching. I was listening to the house settle around me, the creak of the floorboards upstairs, the gentle sigh of the furnace kicking on. This house was more than an investment. It was my life's work. Robert and I had built it all. Every memory, every holiday, every crisis was in these walls. I thought of my children's words. Is it in good order for us? They weren't asking about me. They were asking about their inheritance. They saw me not as their mother, but as a groundskeeper, an unpaid caretaker for their future property. A wave of something that wasn't anger, but a deep, chilling clarity washed over me. I turned off the television. The screen went black, and in it I saw my own reflection, I looked tired, and I looked ready. The next morning, I woke up with the sun. I made my coffee and sat on the back porch. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and roses. The world felt new. I felt new. I went to the little desk in the den, the one where I paid my bills and wrote my Christmas cards. I pulled out the heavy phone book. My fingers, stiff with age, flipped through the thin pages. I was looking for a number, not a doctor, not a roofer, not a plumber. I found it under N, National Trust for Historic Preservation. I wrote the number down on a slip of paper. My handwriting was a little shaky, but the numbers were clear. I picked up the phone. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a steady, patient sound. I took a breath, and then I dialed. A pleasant woman's voice answered. National Trust, how can I help you? I cleared my throat. My own voice sounded stronger than I expected. Hello, I said. My name is Helen Gable. I have a property I believe you might be interested in. A week later, a woman named Sarah from the National Trust came to the house. She had a kind face and wore sensible shoes. I made a pot of tea, and we sat in the sunroom, the wicker chairs creaking softly. The scent of lemon polish hung in the air. This is a remarkable property, Mrs. Gable, she said, looking out at the gardens. My husband and I thought so, I replied. He laid every stone for that patio himself. I gave her a tour. I showed her the original hardwood floors and the little notch on the kitchen doorframe where we measured the children's height. She touched the smooth wood gently. She didn't talk about property values. She talked about history. This place has a soul, she said as she was leaving. Yes, I said. It does. And I want to make sure it keeps it. My lawyer, George Abernathy, looked at me over his glasses. His office smelled of old books and leather. The fan on his desk hummed a steady rhythm. He had been my husband's friend for 40 years. Helen, are you absolutely certain about this? He asked. His voice was gentle. A donation of this magnitude. It's irreversible. I am certain, George. But your children, Mark and Jessica, this is their birthright. I looked at the framed photo on his desk of his own family, all of them smiling at a picnic. Their birthright is a mother who is seen and heard, I said quietly. They seem to have misplaced that. The house is just a house. He sighed and shuffled the papers on his desk. All right, Helen. If this is what you want, I'll draw up the preliminary documents. My neighbour Martha came over for coffee the next afternoon. We sat at the kitchen table with my old chipped mugs. The smell of her cinnamon coffee cake filled the room. My grandkids are coming for 2 weeks in July, she said, her eyes sparkling. They'll tear the place apart, but oh, it will be wonderful to have the noise. I smiled and took a sip of my coffee. The warmth spread through my hands. That sounds lovely, Martha. Are Mark or Jessica planning a visit soon? She asked. A little pang went through me, sharp and quick. They're very busy with their careers abroad, I said. The excuse sounded thin, even to me. I just nodded and took another bite of her delicious cake. Mark called again on Sunday. I was in the middle of watching my favourite gardening show on television. The cheerful host was talking about heirloom tomatoes. Mum, did you get the gutters cleaned? He asked. No hello, no how are you? I did, Mark. Last Tuesday. Good. It's important to keep up with the maintenance. We don't want any water damage. You have to make sure the place stays in good order. I looked at the television. The woman was holding up a big red tomato, smiling. Don't you worry, dear, I said into the phone. Everything is being put into very good order indeed. I have it all under control. I hung up before he could ask any more questions about the house. The following Friday, I met Sarah at George's office. The papers were laid out on the big mahogany conference table. The leather on the chairs squeaked when I sat down. George explained everything slowly, but I already understood. There was a clause. I could live in the house for the rest of my life. I would be its first official curator. After that, it would become the Gable Estate Public Park and Gardens, open for everyone, forever. Sarah handed me a heavy, fancy pen. "Are you ready, Mrs. Gable?" I picked it up. It felt cool and solid in my hand. I thought of my husband and my children as little ones running on the lawn. I thought of their voices on the phone, so distant and cold. I took a deep breath that didn't hurt. And then, with a steady hand, I signed my name. A calm, quiet joy bloomed in my chest, like one of my old roses opening to the morning sun. Walking home from George's office, the air felt different. The familiar scent of Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning lilacs seemed stronger. The sound of children playing in a yard down the street sounded happier. It was the same street I'd lived on for 50 years, but my feet felt lighter on the pavement. I didn't turn on the television that evening. I went into the dining room, a place I hadn't used for months. I opened the heavy cherry wood buffet and took out one crystal wine glass and one of my good china plates. I made myself a simple piece of baked salmon with a lemon from my own tree. I sat at the head of the long, polished table. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. I raised my glass. "To new gardens, Robert," I whispered to the empty chair beside me. The clink of my glass against the silence was the only answer. It was enough. Sarah from the trust came back the next week. She brought large, rolled-up papers that crackled when she spread them across my kitchen table. They were plans of the property. The familiar shape of my home and gardens looked different, marked with dotted lines and small notes. "We thought a walking path could go through the woods here," she said, her finger tracing a line near the old creek, "and perhaps some benches under the big oak tree." "The children used to build forts in those woods," I said, looking at the map. "They would come back covered in mud, happy as clams." "Then we will make sure the path goes around the best fort-building spots," she said with a warm smile. "We want to honor the memories, not erase them." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "That would be nice," I said. "Very nice." Jessica called on Saturday. I was watching the birds at the feeder outside my window, a cup of tea warming my hands. Her voice was tinny, like it was coming through a long pipe. "Mum, just a quick one. I'm about to go into a show," she said. The sounds of a crowded theatre lobby buzzed behind her. "Mark and I were talking. We think we should get a new appraisal done on the house. For insurance purposes, you know. To make sure the asset is properly protected." The asset, not my home, not her childhood home. An asset, like a stock or a bond. I watched a little goldfinch peck at the seeds. "I'll think about it, dear," I said. "Don't just think about it, Mom. It's important. We have to be smart about this." "I am being smart, Jessica," I said, my voice very calm. "I'm taking care of everything." After I hung up, I stayed by the window. The birds didn't worry about appraisals. They just sang. The next morning, I put on my old gardening gloves and went out to the stone wall at the edge of the property. It was covered in thick, stubborn ivy that had been there for years. Robert always meant to clear it. My back complained, and my knees ached on the damp ground. But my hands were steady. I pulled and clipped, yanked and cut. The woody vines were tough, clinging to the stone like a bad memory. Slowly, bit by bit, the beautiful old stones began to appear from underneath the green mess. I worked until my face was flushed and my arms felt heavy. I sat back on the grass, breathing hard, and looked at the small patch I had cleared. It was good, honest work. I thought of my children's voices, so full of plans for a future that didn't really include me, and a single clear thought came into my head. I wasn't dying. I was just becoming inconvenient. George called me a few days later. His voice was all business, but I could hear a note of kindness in it. "Helen, I just wanted to let you know. The deed has been officially filed with the county. It's all recorded. It's done." There was a pause. I looked out the kitchen window at the cleared section of the stone wall. The sun was shining on it. "Thank you, George," I said. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice softening. I thought for a moment. I thought about the phone calls, the quiet house, the heavy weight of being a caretaker for someone else's future. "I feel lighter," I said, and I was surprised to find it was the honest truth. Like I've finally put down a heavy suitcase I didn't even know I was carrying. A few days later, I went to the town library for the first time in years. The air inside smelled of old paper and quiet. I ran my hand along the spines of the books in the local history section. The librarian, a young woman with bright pink glasses, smiled at me. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. "I'd like to learn more about the founding families of this town," I said. "And maybe a book on native plants." She helped me find 3 thick, dusty books. At the checkout desk, she stamped the cards inside with a satisfying thump, thump, thump. "It's so nice to see people interested in our town's roots," she said. "I'm finding they're more important than I ever realized," I told her. I walked out into the sunshine with the books tucked under my arm, feeling like a student again. Sarah called and asked if she could stop by with a landscape architect, a man named David. He was gentle and respectful, and he walked the grounds with me for over an hour. He didn't talk about resale value. He talked about the health of the oak tree and the quality of the soil. "We want to make the public paths feel like they've always been here," he said, his hands in the pockets of his jacket. Later, Sarah and I sat on the porch with glasses of iced tea. The ice cubes clinked against the glass. "We've been thinking about the dedication plaque," she said. "We'd like your input on the wording." I thought for a moment, watching a bee buzz around my roses. "It should be simple," I said. "The Gable Estate. A gift to the people of this town, in loving memory of Robert Gable. A place to find peace." Sarah wrote it down in her little notebook. "That's beautiful, Helen." I went to the church potluck on Wednesday night. The fellowship hall was buzzing with chatter and smelled of baked ham and scalloped potatoes. Martha saved me a seat at her table. "You've got a spring in your step, Helen," she said, passing me the green bean casserole. "What's your secret?" "Just keeping busy," I said, scooping some onto my paper plate. "Any word from the kids?" she asked, her voice a little lower. I smiled at her. It was a real smile, not the tight one I usually used for that question. "They call now and then," I said, "but I'm working on a new project, for the future. It's taking up a lot of my time." It wasn't a lie, not at all. The call I was expecting came that weekend. It was Mark. His voice was sharp, impatient. "Mum, I talked to Jessica. Did you call an appraiser? We need to get that done." I was polishing the silver, just like I had been weeks ago when this all started. I held a small fork in my hand, its tines intricate and delicate. "Hello, Mark. I'm fine. Thank you for asking." He huffed into the phone. "I don't have time for games. The appraiser. Did you call him?" "No, dear, I didn't," I said calmly. "There's no need for that anymore." What do you mean, no need? It's a multi-million-dollar asset. We have to keep things in good order. I set the fork down on the soft cloth. Oh, I have, I said, my voice as smooth as the polished silver. Everything is in perfect order now, the best order it's ever been in. After the phone call with Mark, I knew the next one would be different. The quiet was over. I went into the den and pulled a heavy photo album from the shelf. The cover was worn velvet, soft under my fingertips. I sat in Robert's old armchair and opened it. There they were. Mark on his first bicycle, his face a mixture of terror and glee. Jessica in a frilly Easter dress, holding a basket of coloured eggs. Page after page of birthday parties, Christmases, and summer vacations. I used to look at these pictures and feel a deep, aching sadness for what was gone. But that night, I just felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. I had given them a beautiful life in a beautiful place. The pictures proved it. Now, that place would be a gift for hundreds of other children, for families who needed a patch of green and a bit of peace. I closed the album, stood up, and turned out the light. I was not losing a house. I was gaining a park. The letter from George's office went out on a Monday. I knew because he told me. I spent the next 2 days waiting. I wasn't nervous. I was just waiting, like waiting for a train you know is coming. I weeded the last of the ivy from the stone wall and planted new lavender bushes along the base. The air smelled clean and sweet. The phone rang on Thursday morning. The sun was streaming into the kitchen, making dust motes dance in the light. I was wiping down the counters. It was Mark. I knew from the angry silence on the other end when I said hello. "We got a letter," he said. His voice was tight, like a wire. "From George Abernathy. What have you done?" I dried my hands on a dish towel. The fabric was soft and worn. "I've secured the future of the property, Mark, just as you and Jessica were so concerned about." "Secured it? You gave it away. Our home. You just gave it away to strangers." "Not strangers," I corrected him gently. "I gave it to everyone. It's going to be a park." There was a sputtering sound. "A park? Are you insane? That estate is worth millions. That was for us." "The house is mine, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It was never an asset in an account, waiting for you. It was my home." I hung up the phone before he could yell any more. The silence that followed was wonderful. An hour later, Jessica called. Her voice was different from Mark's. It was slick with false concern. I was sitting on the porch swing, which creaked in a familiar, comforting rhythm. "Mother?" she said, her voice dripping with pity. "Mark told me. I am so worried about you. You're all alone in that big house. Someone from this trust has clearly taken advantage of your vulnerable state." "I am not vulnerable, Jessica, and Sarah is a very nice woman." "You don't understand, Mother. You've been manipulated. You threw away our entire future, our children's future. For what? Some benches and a plaque." I looked out at the old oak tree where she and Mark used to play. "I did it for peace, Jessica. You should try it sometime." "We're flying home," she said, her voice turning hard. "We are going to get this sorted out. We'll hire a lawyer. We will prove you weren't competent to make this decision." "The airport is still in the same place," I said. "And George Abernathy has all the paperwork. It's all in very good order." I hung up on her too. The swing continued its gentle creaking. The next day, I had a meeting at the town hall. It was about the park. Sarah was there, and David, the landscape architect, and 2 members of the town council. They showed me drawings of a small playground they wanted to build near the creek. It had a wooden slide and swings. "What do you think, Helen?" Sarah asked. I looked at the happy stick-figure children in the drawing. I imagined their real laughter echoing through the trees. "I think it's a wonderful idea," I said. My phone buzzed in my purse. I saw Mark's name on the screen. I silenced it and put it away. The councilwoman was talking about fundraising for the playground equipment. I felt a real, genuine smile spread across my face. I was building something, not just waiting for something to be taken. Mark left a message on my machine. I listened to it later while I was washing the dinner dishes. The water was warm on my hands. "Mum, pick up the phone. This is not over. You have made a catastrophic mistake, and we are not going to let it stand. We are your children. You owe us. We've hired an attorney in town, a Mr. Peterson. He'll be in touch with George. We are going to fight this." I turned off the machine. The word, "oh," hung in the air. I thought of the sleepless nights when they were sick, the parent-teacher conferences, the tuition checks I signed until my hand cramped. I had paid all my debts to them a long time ago. That evening, I took one of the local history books from the library and sat in Robert's chair. I read about the family who had farmed this land 100 years before we ever built our house. They had 5 children and raised dairy cows. The book had a grainy, black-and-white photo of them standing in front of their barn. They looked tired, but they looked proud. The house had a life before me, and now it would have a life after me. My children saw it as an ending point, a final prize. But I was turning it back into a beginning. The phone didn't ring again that night. I read until my eyes grew heavy, and I slept better than I had in years. They arrived a week later. I saw the rental car pull into the driveway from the kitchen window. It was a shiny black sedan that looked too important for my gravel drive. Mark got out of the driver's side, Jessica from the passenger's. They didn't look like they were coming home. They looked like they were coming to an audit. I opened the front door before they could knock. I had a pitcher of lemonade and glasses on the hall table. The ice cubes sweated in the afternoon heat. "Hello, children," I said. Mark's face was a thundercloud. Jessica had her arms crossed over her chest. "Mother?" she said, and the word was an accusation. "There's lemonade," I offered. "We're not here for lemonade," Mark snapped. "We're here to fix the mess you've made." They walked past me into the living room, their suitcases banging against the doorframe. They didn't kiss my cheek. They didn't even look at me. They sat on the sofa, stiff and formal. I sat in Robert's armchair. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly, measuring the silence. "We've spoken to our lawyer," Jessica began, her voice smooth and practiced. "He's confident that we can have this transaction overturned on the grounds of diminished capacity." I looked at my hands, resting on the worn arms of the chair. They were old hands, spotted with age, but they were steady. "Is that what you think? That I've lost my mind?" "What else are we supposed to think?" Mark burst out. "You gave away our inheritance. You gave away Dad's legacy." "Your father's legacy was not about money," I said, my voice even. "It was about building a good life. It was about community. He would have loved the idea of a park." "Don't you dare bring Dad into this," Jessica said, her voice sharp. "This is about your irrational decision-making." The first meeting with the lawyers was in George's office. The air was thick with tension. Mark and Jessica sat on one side of the big mahogany table with their new lawyer, Mr. Peterson. He was a young man with a shiny suit and an anxious expression. I sat with George. The scent of his old books felt like a comfort. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. My clients are deeply concerned for their mother's welfare, he began. They believe she was unduly influenced at a time of great emotional distress. George just looked at him over his glasses. Helen, would you like to respond to that? I looked at Mark, then at Jessica. Their faces were hard, impatient. I was in no distress, I said calmly. I was, for the first time in a long while, perfectly clear. My children called me only to ask about the condition of their future asset. They showed no concern for my welfare, only for the upkeep of the property. Jessica gasped, a small theatrical sound. That's not true. We love our mother. Love is a verb, Jessica, I said, looking right at her. It's an action. It's a phone call to ask how a person is, not how the roof is. Mr. Peterson started shuffling his papers. That night, the house was full of angry whispers. I could hear them from my bedroom, their voices rising and falling from the guest rooms down the hall. They were making plans. They were strategizing. I pulled my old quilt up to my chin. It smelled of sunshine and lavender. I fell asleep to the sound of crickets outside my window, not the sound of my children's plotting. The next day, I found Jessica in the dining room, running her hand over the polished table. Her expression was strange, a mix of anger and something else. I had my 8th birthday party at this table, she said, not looking at me. I remember, I said. You wore a pink dress and you spilled chocolate ice cream right there. I pointed to a spot near the end. This was supposed to be mine someday, she said, her voice low. I was going to have my own children's birthday parties here. You could have, I said softly. You could have visited. You could have brought your children here any time. The house was always waiting for you, but you never came. You just called to check on the investment. She turned and walked out of the room without another word. On Saturday, I told them I was going into town. We'll come with you, Mark said immediately. We don't think you should be going out alone. Don't be silly, I said, picking up my purse. I'm just going to the library. I didn't go to the library. I went to the town hall. Sarah met me there. We walked over to the edge of the town green, where a small sign had been put up on an easel for a community meeting. It was a beautiful artist's drawing of the future Gable Park. There were families having picnics on the lawn and children flying kites. A reporter from the local paper was there. Sarah introduced me. Mrs. Gable, the young man said, holding a notepad. This is an incredibly generous gift to the town. What made you decide to do it? I looked at the drawing, at the happy, imaginary people enjoying the sunshine. I thought of my children in my quiet house, talking to lawyers. Some people see a home as something to be owned, I said. I decided my home was something to be shared. The article came out in the Wednesday edition of the local paper. There was a picture of me smiling, standing in front of the stone wall. Mark slammed the paper down on the kitchen table. The coffee in my mug sloshed over the rim. Front page, Mother. The front page. Local widow makes historic donation. You've made us look like fools. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, dabbing the spilled coffee with a napkin. Jessica came in, wrapping her silk robe tighter around herself. She picked up the paper, and her face went pale. Oh my God. Everyone we grew up with will see this. They'll think we abandoned you. They'll think we're horrible. Well, I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Are you? She stared at me, her mouth a thin line. She didn't have an answer. The silence in the kitchen was thick and heavy, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of the coffee maker. My neighbor Martha called me that afternoon. Helen, I just saw the paper. What a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. My grandchildren will be able to play there. Robert would be so proud. Her genuine warmth was like a balm. We chatted for a few minutes about her garden and the upcoming church bake sale. While we were talking, Mark walked through the living room and gave me a look of pure fury. I just smiled and waved at him. "Are the children home?" Martha asked. I could hear the question behind the question. "Yes, they're here for a short visit," I said smoothly. "They're having a little trouble adjusting to the news." "Well, some people have a hard time with generosity," she said, and I knew she understood everything. The next day, they tried a different approach. Guilt. Mark found me in the den, looking through old tax records. He was holding his old Little League baseball glove. The leather was dark and cracked with age. "Remember this?" he asked, tossing it from hand to hand. "You and Dad never missed a game, right on that lawn you're giving away." "I remember," I said. "You were a terrible shortstop." His face tightened. "That's not the point. The point is the memories. How can you erase all our memories?" "The memories are in your head, Mark, not in the grass," I said, turning back to my papers. "You can take them with you wherever you go. You certainly haven't been visiting them here." Jessica tried later, while I was arranging flowers in the hall. "I was going through the attic," she said, her voice soft and sad. "I found my wedding album. We took those pictures under the big oak tree." "They were lovely pictures," I agreed, snipping the end of a rose stem. "It was all supposed to stay in the family. That's what Dad would have wanted. He built this for us." I put the rose in the vase and looked at her. "Your father built this for us to live in. He didn't build it to be a museum for a family that never visits. He would have wanted it to be full of life. Now it will be." I had my yearly checkup with Dr. Miller on Friday. Mark insisted on driving me. He sat in the waiting room, tapping his foot impatiently, like a warden with a prisoner. The room smelled of rubbing alcohol and old magazines. Dr. Miller was a kind man who had been my doctor for 20 years. He took my blood pressure and listened to my heart. The paper on the exam table crinkled under me. "Well, Helen," he said, smiling as he took off his stethoscope. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Your blood pressure is the best it's been in 5 years. You seem very content." Mark was waiting for me by the reception desk. "So?" he asked, as if he expected a diagnosis of dementia. "The doctor says I'm in excellent health," I said, pulling on my cardigan. "He said I seem very content." I looked him right in the eye. He's right. They left on Sunday. Their suitcases were by the door before I even came down for breakfast. The house was quiet. They drank their coffee in silence, avoiding my eyes. When the taxi pulled up, Mark finally spoke. "Our lawyer says we have no case," he said, his voice flat and defeated. "He says you're perfectly competent." "I know," I said. Jessica stood by the door, her hand on her suitcase. She looked around the foyer at the grandfather clock and the worn runner on the stairs. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of real sadness in her eyes. "Was it worth it, Mother?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Losing your family for a park?" I looked past her, out the open door to the sunlit lawn. I could almost hear the sound of children laughing. "I didn't lose my family," I said. "I just finally accepted that I was the only one who still lived here." They walked out, and I closed the door behind them. After the taxi pulled away, the silence it left behind was deep and clean. I walked through the house, my house, and it felt different. The air was lighter. I opened the windows in the living room, and a breeze came through, smelling of cut grass and warm sun. It didn't feel empty. It felt open. That afternoon, Sarah from the trust stopped by. She didn't call first, just knocked on the back door like a friend. We sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea. "I just wanted to see how you were doing," she said, her kind eyes watching me. "I'm doing very well, Sarah," I told her. And I was. My children have gone back to their lives. I'm sorry if it was difficult. I smiled and looked out the window at the big oak tree. "It was necessary," I said. "Sometimes you have to prune a rose bush for it to bloom again." She just nodded, and we sat in comfortable silence, drinking our tea. The first crews arrived in the fall. They were polite men who called me Mrs. Gable and took their muddy boots off before coming inside to ask a question. I would make them a big pot of coffee in the morning and leave it on the porch. They were clearing the new walking paths through the woods. The sound of their work was a happy sound, a sound of creation. My neighbour Martha and I would walk the property in the evenings. The air grew crisp and smelled of wood smoke. "It's amazing, Helen," she said one evening, as we stood looking at a newly cleared path that curved gently toward the creek. "You're making something that will outlast all of us." I pulled my sweater tighter. That was the idea. "Are you happy?" she asked. I thought about the tense phone calls, the heavy loneliness, and I thought about this new, purposeful quiet. "Yes," I said, "I am." One Saturday in spring, I was tending my roses when a young woman with a toddler came wandering up the driveway. The park wasn't officially open yet, but the gates were unlocked. The little boy was crying, a tired, fussy sound. The mother looked exhausted. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, trying to bounce the crying child on her hip. "We just moved here, and I saw the sign for the new park. I just needed to get out of the house." "You're not bothering me at all," I said, setting down my trowel. "Would he like a cookie?" We sat on the porch steps. I brought out a glass of water for her and an oatmeal cookie for the little boy. He stopped crying and nibbled on it, his big eyes watching me. "It's going to be so wonderful to have a place like this to come," the young mother said. "Thank you. I don't think you know what a gift this is for people like me." "Oh, I think I do," I said, watching her son finish his cookie. "I think I do." The dedication ceremony was on a perfect June afternoon. The whole town, it seemed, was there. The lawn was dotted with families on picnic blankets. George Abernathy sat next to me in the front row, and Martha was on my other side. Sarah gave a lovely speech. Then the mayor invited me to say a few words. I walked to the little podium. I didn't have anything written down. I just looked out at all the faces, young and old. "My husband and I built a home here," I said, my voice clear and steady. "We filled it with love and memories. A home should be full of life. I am so happy to see it full of life once again." I paused and looked at the new bronze plaque near the stone wall. I was asked recently if everything was still in good order here, and I can tell you all today, looking at you, that it has never been in better order. There was a warm wave of applause. I smiled and sat down, and Martha squeezed my hand. I don't get phone calls from Germany or London anymore. Sometimes a postcard comes on a birthday or Christmas, with a stiff, formal signature. I put them on the mantel for a day, and then I throw them away. My life is here now. My mornings are my favourite. I wake up with the sun. I make my coffee and sit on the back porch. The air smells of roses and damp earth. I can hear the squeak of the swings from the little playground. And, sometimes, the faint sound of a child's laughter carried on the breeze. Young mothers stop to ask me about my flowers. Old men sit on the benches under the oak tree and talk about the weather. Teenagers walk the paths, holding hands. It is my home, but it is also theirs. Yesterday, a little girl with bright red pigtails ran up to me while I was weeding. She held out a fistful of dandelions. "These are for you," she said, her face serious, "because you made the park." I took the cheerful yellow weeds from her small hand. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "They're beautiful." She grinned and ran off toward the playground. I stood there in the sun, holding my little bouquet, and I felt a deep, quiet joy. I was no longer a caretaker of a silent house. I was the keeper of a garden full of life, and I was finally, truly, at peace.